Right now, I got Jeffrey Ford. And Jeff, man, you mind if I say Jeff? I don't know. Some
No,
people
that's
like,
good.
I got to say this. After talking with you and after reading some of the stuff, the bio that you sent me, this is going to be a pretty interesting night. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, we're
it's
going to
been a
get
while since
down.
I did any of this stuff, so I needed to get back into it anyway. And I saw that Jim Bunker had been, or Jim Brown had been on the show, and I was like, well, they might be all right. uh,
And
Jim Brown.
so,
Jim Brown's a good dude. He's been in.
he is,
He
he
got
is.
in it early. He's solid on his facts. He's got some good documentation. If I need something, I'm like, hey Jim, you got that? And it's in my box.
Oh, see, that's freaking awesome, man. He is so full of information, and I love
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep. Yep.
But right before we get started, I want to thank everybody for getting us up to 900, almost 940 people on YouTube. I mean, we're growing every day. It's getting bigger. We're getting the word out about, the goal for, problems that we're having over there and what was done to us. And update, I'm still on the dad bod workout. I'm on number 10 day. Everything's going great. I'm losing weight. I feel great. My head feels a whole lot clearer. I mean, so it's amazing taking care of your body.
So you're starting to look like Pat Mahomes.
Ah, man, I tell you, I'm starting to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his youth.
Wow. Okay.
It sounds good. I mean, come on.
Hey,
You
okay.
gotta,
E for effort.
hey, one thing about it, I mean, big Dr. Pepper drinker, but I'm not anymore. I do the Dr. Pepper Zero, only at night. Rest is water. Okay, well, that's enough of that. Okay, so we got there. So now let's get in to the most important. You want me to bring up the slide? But well, let's
How
first
many
talk
we
a little
got?
bit. Well, let's
Yeah, I
first
got.
talk.
How many we got on watching? We got
Uh,
anybody, or is it just
oh
us?
yeah. Oh no,
All
no,
right.
no. So first, I want to talk
Glad to
about
have you, folks.
when you went in, what branch of service, and let's go through that, and then we're gonna get into the slides.
Yeah, because I'm gonna assume not everybody knows a whole lot about Comcia. So um, we're gonna. This is not gonna be the advanced version, but it's not for beginners either. Okay, so I joined in '88, combat engineer in the 82nd Airborne, uh, 307th Engineer Battalion. We were the ones that was tasked with blowing Comcia. Um, and the 37th engineers, the guys who shot the video, and the ones who actually primed that first set of bunkers was the 37th engineers down the street over at COSCOM, still at Fort Bragg Airborne Com. They were like our sister unit, but they were tasked under us. Um, the morning of Talil, or I'm sorry, the morning that the bunkers were blown, we were over at Talil blowing 1,000-pound bombs at the airport. Now there was supposed intel that said that there might be chemical over there, but we got over to Comicia just as they pulled the fuse. I was sitting up on the headache board of my 5-ton, just cracked open an MRE, going to watch the show. I had a Miklik on my trailer, mine clearing line charge. That was about 2,500 pounds of C4, and then another 800 landmines in the bed of my truck. So I was rolling about 5,000 pounds of C4, um, and watching the show when flyouts started.
So let's talk about you went in. What how old were you when you went in?
I was 25 when I joined. I was the old man, and
Well, you were old.
I caught a lot of shit until we went to the Pugil stick course, and I put 2 guys in the hospital on one swing. They didn't mess with me anymore, but
Yeah.
let's get back to Cavacian.
All right, let's get back to it. Let's get back
Um,
to this.
yeah, pull up slides. Let's just go with that
All right, let's go with it.
because I know these folks are chomping at the bit. I know everybody here. It's been 30 years since it came to light that we had blown up chemicals. I got out in '92. The revelation between unscum inspection teams and DOD and CIA base, and then it started to come out in '95 that we'd possibly blown chemicals. The UN was never ambivalent about it. They're the ones that found them. But as I tell people, don't worry about the government trying to contrive and carry out conspiracies against us. They're not that good at it. But if they screw something up, they're really good at plausible deniability. And they,
you're
we know
right
that.
about that.
So this is the first bunker going off. And this is from a friend of mine that took this shot with a disposable camera from my unit. Now, this is a monumental photo in that if you look out there at that flag on that vehicle,
Yeah, I see it.
that is blowing to the southwest, my friend, right towards all of our troops. And now I provided this photo on day one when I testified before the Presidential Advisory Committee hearing in Tampa in October of '96. I gave this picture to the Department of the DOD IG. I gave it to Osagwe, if we all know who that is, the Office of the Special Assistant to Gulf War Illnesses. But nowhere did this picture ever show up. And in fact, their contention was that on March 4th, when we blew Camisea, the wind was blowing the other direction. But we'll get into that. So let's see. Am I doing the? Yeah, I'm doing the slideshow.
You're doing the slideshow.
Where's my? Okay, there we go. So there was 2 demolition events. March 4th. That's when Bunker 73 that had about 1,100 122 millimeter Egyptian-made Russian-styled rockets tipped with sarin cyclosarin. We're thinking about 50 to 60% purity. They had just got out of the factory at Almathana right before we bombed it. So the sarin in the warheads are about 45 days old. They're about the length of the air war old. That's part of the reason the air war went as long as it did, because they wanted to make sure that they could degrade his munitions that had been filled at the factory. They needed to get some time on them to get the purity down. So on the left is about 45 minutes after I think there was 43 bunkers that was blown at that time. Bunker 73 was one of them.
I'm surprised the sky is as blue as it is in that picture.
Well, it was clear. It was a nice day. It was very calm, but there was a major storm front that was coming in from Egypt, and it was actually pulling air, warm, moist air up out of the Persian Gulf. How do I know that? We have all the logs with the weather forecasts. So again, the DOD and CIA claimed that it was raining that day. Well, it wasn't.
So who's taking the picture there?
That's this picture was actually taken from the town Tal Alam, which is probably about 2 clicks or a mile to the southwest of where we are.
Oh, that sucks for them.
So, well, yeah, because as you can see, it's a different angle. And what's happening is, as that's going up, it's starting to hit the boundary layer where we all know that when a storm front's coming in from the west, it starts pulling in air from the east, right? We all know that. Well, that's exactly what's happening here. That plume is going straight up and it's flattening out. It's anviling out. And then on the other side, there's no pictures of any plume from March 10th. The reason being is after all the shit started flying out of Bunker 73 and associated piles on the 4th, we weren't dumb enough to sit around and watch. We got a little further back on the 10th. The picture that's shown there on the 10th is actually from the downwind hazard model.
Now, when you guys were out there, Jeffrey, and this was getting blown up, I mean, at that given time, were you guys aware
No.
of what you were blowing up?
No. You got there was 56 kilotons worth of ordnance. There was 100 warehouses and 50 bunkers chocked full. We had 3 platoons of combat engineers and 4 EOD guys, and none of us knew what we were looking for. Did they mark them with yellow bands, white bands, stars and stripes? Who knows? Well, come to find out, they didn't mark their chemical weapons because Saddam and his son Uday, who was in charge of the chemical corps, didn't trust anybody and knew that if the Kurds ever got their hands on any, they were going to be screwed. So they didn't mark them. So their chemical corps would pick them up at the factory and they maintained possession until they either used them or took them back to the factory to be recycled. What had happened was they were in such a rush to get some out that by the time they got to Camisea with them, all total, I think there was like close to 2,200 of them. Some of them started leaking. So they downloaded the good ones into Bunker 73, and out in the pit area, they downloaded the ones that were starting to leak. Well, the invasion happened. They got overran. They ran, and ta-da. Now, as far back as 1986, the CIA knew that there was potential. Now I got to stress, this is the largest ammunition supply depot in South Central Iraq. They used it for the Iran-Iraq war. They used it for the invasion of Kuwait, and they were going to use it on us.
Right.
Why didn't we bomb it out of oblivion? Why send the 82nd Airborne to capture it? If you want something captured, who you send? Hot diggity dog, we got there. That's because they wanted to get hold of some of these weapons and test their chemical weapon capability. Check.
And so that's the one thing I never quite understood.
But they told us, blow this. They told word for word. There's no chemicals in the theater of operation. There's no chemicals to worry about. The ships are at the port. It's between you guys and the 24th because you were first over and first home. Blow the shit and get out of here. They were already sending our infantry and all of our units were already starting to head back.
I can see I was attached to the 24th ID. We were construction. I mean, technically at that given time under the umbrella of combat engineers, but we were construction engineers. So
they're starting to retrograde because you guys' mission was done. All you were tasked with was maintaining the MSRs long enough to get your asses back to Saudi Arabia while we were up here blowing this stuff. So you can see, do not blow Kim in place. But we never knew that it was there in the first place. So
right. Now, did y'all's alarms go off?
One alarm from over where that flag was on that vehicle. One of their alarms went off. It was an alarm that an M8 that they had strapped to the hood of the Humvee that they'd been driving around the depot, churning up dust into the sensors all day long. And so they kind of was like, yeah, well, we kind of expected this. But, there was no dust coming into our AO. It was all still over there. There was no wind by that time. So it was all just kind of sitting there. Well, so they go to mop. They start putting on their mop gear and got in their Humvees and left. Well, we're the 82nd Airborne Division. We're not putting on our mop gear until somebody drops dead. Right?
Right.
Well, so I'm
That
standing there
sounds
with,
like Wade, 101st.
yeah, right. Well, there, yeah. Um, so I'm standing there in front of the company Alpha Company 307th Engineer Commander, who's in charge of this operation, and our NBC NCO, while he's shaking like a leaf trying to put blister pack on the M256 kit. Gets an inconclusive on the first one. He's sweating bullets, and I'm like, Sergeant Perez, chill out. Just, you know. So they did another
Hey.
one. Couldn't get a reading. So then him and the commander hop in the Hummer and head out to the highway. So at this point in time, I get my little battle buddy I said, come on with me. And we got up in the cab of my truck. I said, put your mask on. And they said, but why? We were told not to. I said, shut up, put your mask on. Well, it was the heat of the afternoon, the sunshine, and we fell asleep. And I don't know how long it was, maybe 30 minutes. Finally, an NCO come banging on the door. Get your asses out of here. Get them goddamn masks off. So by this time, we're not going anywhere because we got to pull guard duty on the entrance to Commissary all night so some dumbasses don't drive in there and get blown up, which was going to, but keep in mind, by this time, these rockets, we didn't have enough demo. Okay, stick to the slides. We went through. We didn't have enough demo. They were airing it in on Chinooks. We couldn't get it enough, So basically, they were just stacking a few cases on top of these crates in the bunkers, and it became a denial operation. It was like just trash this place as bad as you can. Well, all the guidance that they had done as far as testing the destruction of bunkers had been done on igloo style bunkers out at Nevada Test Range in White Sands back in the 70s and 80s. These were fully covered igloos. Well, the Iraqi bunkers were concrete buildings with flat roofs with sand piled up, bermed up
That's what I was going to ask you,
to
if
the
these
side.
were exposed or
The
open, and you just
the
answered
roofs
that.
the
Okay.
roofs the roofs were exposed. So what happened? We blew the roofs off, which and then we created a crater, which happened to be the exact same angle as the rocket launchers on the back of the BM whatever vehicles that they shoot these things out of, which are like 20-degree angle. So these rockets are laying up on the embankments, pointed out. They're electrostatically charged, fired. So the heat and the dust, these suckers start going down range. At first it was cool. Wow.
Yeah. I would be thinking that.
And then all of a sudden, well, fortunately they weren't fused, so they weren't detonating. Otherwise, we've been zapped. One of them landed 20 clicks out at the 82nd Airborne Division Commander Johnson. You got a picture of him with the rocket mower laying at his feet next to his cot. Well, so these flyouts are going 10, 20 clicks out. They're landing in other people's AOs. In fact, the radio chatter just went crazy. We're getting fired upon. We're fired upon. We get fired. They were like, nah, it's just the engineers fucking around. So there's a picture of the loading the rocket. This is Czechoslovakian Army training
I was gonna say,
video.
that ain't us.
No. Well, we didn't use these. These are their version of the MLRS. And you can see there at the tail, the fins are collapsed around the casing and they have bands on them. That's so they can shove them in the tube. The CIA contended that the rockets that they found didn't have any fins on them, and they couldn't have gone very far, maybe 2 kilometers, because they were banded. Well, their design, the rocket motors have vents on them so that when they fire, they burn the bands, and by the time they get to the end of the launcher, they've come out the end and the fins deploy and go downrange. So that was a lie, and they knew it. They also said they did a drop test of one of the rockets out at Dugway when they did the downwind hazard modeling, and that it buried itself 30 feet into the ground. Now think about that. That is the equivalent of a 3-story office building. Now, if we could get a little 9-foot, 122 millimeter rocket to shoot 30 feet down, why do we have to spend $1 million to build mother of all bombs? It was just another lie. So we stayed there all night, and I pulled guard duty at 1 o'clock in the morning. It was still cooking off straight ahead, and it was still dead calm. And to my left, across the Euphrates, the Shia Muslims were fighting Saddam's troops because now they're in rebellion. And I'm like, okay, great. We got cook-offs flying out of Qamishia, and across the river over there, it was still a pretty active war zone.
I can't believe that. I'm sitting here reading.
So here's an example. On the left is one of Schwarzkopf's chemical logs. On the right is one of the intelligence documents that was declassified and released by the Office of the Special Assistant to Gulf War Veterans Illnesses, Rostiker's office. Now, when they were starting to declassify stuff, initially, smart guys like Jim Brown started filling out FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act. And so this is before it was hitting the news and before the DOD knew that we were hunting, because they had some documentation from UNSCOM, because the UN inspection teams came through a few months after us, because the Iraqis were declaring their chemical weapons. And so UNSCOM went to DIA, which is Defense Intelligence Agency, and the CIA and the DOD, and they said, "Oh, you guys put up a bunch of chemical weapons up here." And they said, "No, the Iraqis planted them there to make us look bad," and they shoved it all under the rug. Well, so people like Jim Brown gets Schwarzkopf's chemical logs and gets some of these other things. But what they did early on was they sent a FOIA request to every military base in the world, requesting every document that had to do with anything that was NBC for Desert Shield, Desert Storm. In other words, give us everything you got. So if you can imagine some FOIA officer down in a basement somewhere off in Germany, somewhere going, fuck bullshit. He's got to redact it, stamp it declass, burn a copy of that. So finally, they're just like, stamp, stamp. And so they're getting a bunch of unredacted stuff. Well, then the revelation comes out, and they fire up the declassification team. Now you got to get your FOIA through them, and they ain't giving you nothing. But that's okay, because by this time, they've been getting stuff for a year. And they got millions of pages of stuff. And when I say they, I'm just talking about the early,
the
early watchdogs.
Watchdogs, yeah. And
so I was a little late to the party. I got there in the latter part of '96. But the point being this, so now they put up the GulfLink website, and they're touting, we're putting the documents up. so that anybody can do a Boolean text search and just find anything you want. And I said, well, almost, but as you can see by the document on the left, you're not going to take a 1997 scanner and get any text out of that. The word bomb is going to be P/mark*L. You're not. It was
Right.
all garbage. And I said, well,
Let me ask you this.
mhm.
Let me ask you this, Jeffrey. Aside from the paperwork and stuff, let's talk. If you don't mind, let's just. I'm a little curious because, like we've
Sure.
asked Wade these same questions. As far as your person, when you're in the proximity, you're right there, and things go up. When did you realize that you personally had issues? I mean, when you're right there, ground zero, when did you realize
You mean at
something ain't right
Comacia
with me?
or
With your
just in
person.
general? Well, I
With
don't have Gulf War syndrome. I mean,
okay.
I got a lot of. I've got. Well, let me rephrase that. I didn't believe that I did, and um, yeah, I've got irritable bowel, I got narcolepsy and sleep apnea and yada yada yada. But even though I
Well, the government. I mean, no doctor is going to say you have Gulf War illness. So
well,
we all know that it's going to be
well,
all
yeah,
the issues that are Gulf War. They're not going to say you have Gulf War. That doesn't exist. Almost what, maybe less than
well,
0.005% of the population is
you know,
there. We've had one or two
yeah,
people that acknowledge that,
I got
but I
sent
mean,
to the War-Related Illness Research Center there in East Orange, New Jersey, and they said, yeah, he has some signs and symptoms that could be characterized as what we believe to be called Gulf War veterans illnesses. But even though I sat down with the legislative director of the Vietnam Veterans of America over beers in Washington and wrote the Persian Gulf Veterans Health Act of 1998, which was the undiagnosed illnesses legislation, and I filed a claim that was 27 pages long. I didn't get shit. So, but here's the point, and this is, I want everybody to understand this. You don't need to show cause. You don't need to prove that you were gassed, because exposure does not mean illness or service connection. And we have presumptive service connection. We worked hard to have that. If you served in the theater of operations anytime up until 2002, you're presumed exposed to everything. And that was kind of the trouble that when we went to write this, because we just basically copied the Agent Orange Act that had been passed the year before. But with Agent Orange, you have dioxin. You have one causative factor, and you can monitor health situation with Vietnam vets and kind of come up with presumptive service connections as far as what Agent Orange will do to you. Well, like I told Congress, I said, they asked me what's making these veterans sick, and I was pretty clear about it 28 years ago, and I have not changed my mind. I said, we don't know. We'll probably never know, but I know this much. We went over healthy, we came back sick, and we don't want to be. And they said,
right.
what do we need to do? I said, well, the way it stands now, you have an accident or an exposure, and that is service connected, and you get a diagnosis and you get treated and compensated. But just because you don't have a diagnosis doesn't mean we still shouldn't be treated and compensated. So hence the undiagnosed illnesses legislation. The problem with it was we were just trying to get something on the books because the momentum was right. We had Congress. By this time it was into 97. We Congress was begging for something, and we figured we would we built into the legislation that to set up the VA Research Advisory Committee, the RAC, so that we would go start doing the research and start looking for the presumptive service connections. The problem is we don't have Agent Orange. We got Agent Rainbow. We don't know what everybody's genetically predisposed to certain environmental and stressful triggers in the environment that trips a switch.
Thank you. I'm so glad you just said that.
And that's why we're all different. That's why there is no Gulf War syndrome, in the sense that, like Agent Orange, everybody exposed to the same thing and you get a syndrome out of it. We have ill-defined signs and symptoms and clusters, whatever they want to call it. But
I call it side effects.
Yep.
it's
all kinds of that.
multi-systemic chronic illness.
Right. Right. And that's the hard part, Jeff, because the way I look at it is they're never going to know. To me, we're never going to find a cure. The only thing you can do is live your life the best way you can live it and enjoy it, and don't
Right.
frown on it.
Well, and as tough as it sounds, because early on there was a lot of miscommunication about stress being involved. Stress, we know, is a causative factor and can trigger illness. It was not saying that we were weak-minded, or it whether it's environmental, emotional, any stress is a disease in and of itself. We got people dropping dead from heart attacks and all that every day from stress. Stress on your limbic system, on your immune system, on your on all your systems, releases chemicals, endorphins, triggers things, and in combination with sarin and DEET and depleted uranium and oil well fire smoke and God knows what, your switch gets flipped. Now,
And I think there's so many men and women when they go into the doctor, and we talk about, like you said, Gulf War illness, and they take that particular title and say, well, do I have this? And the answer is yes, but nobody's going to diagnose you with that. It's all the plethora of other things that
because
we know that we were likely had everything from burn pits to shots to, I mean, the clothes we were wearing,
because
pesticides, the nerve agents.
it doesn't do any good to go in and go, hey doc, I think I got Gulf War syndrome. He looks back at you and goes,
No. You have to go in and say,
no, I know. And he says, yeah, I think you do too. What do we do about it? I don't know, but I can help you with that rash. I mean, that's
yeah. See, I mean,
but
you got to have acknowledgement of something is wrong, and they can't really explain it.
Yeah, but hey,
where were you at this time?
Well,
You know,
it doesn't matter, because they have to treat the
no, that
patient.
does matter.
Well,
It has to be under DD 214.
Well, what I'm saying, in a clinical sense, they have to treat the patient as they present in the clinic. So you can sit here and say, yeah, I think I was exposed to sarin in the Gulf, but I've got this rash and these upper respiratory infections. So you got to treat those things as they present. You can't treat a sarin, low-level subacute chronic exposure of sarin 20 years ago, but we are looking into the ability to do that. But in the meantime, you still got to treat you for the rash. You know what I'm saying?
Right. They got to treat the problem.
And in the meantime, we're all sharing information as to, hey, Kevin, what are you using that works for you? Hey, Wade, what are you using? Hey, what's the Band-Aid, as Kevin says? What's the Band-Aid for this year? Yeah, or the dad. No, I mean, what makes you feel better? What makes you feel better?
Well, that's a good point, because we are getting older, and it's not getting any easier, and we do have to find things that make us better, because we know the VA's not going to do it. So, and that hasn't really changed in 30 years since all this came to light. Now, I will say this much: early on, can I cuss on this show?
Okay.
There was some fucked up motherfuckers. They were sick, bad. I'm talking about demyelination of the brainstem kind of stuff, crawled up in a ball screaming their head off. Fortunately, the ones that were really bad off, they died.
Right. Right.
But we all know that you can walk into any VA right now and sit down next to a Vietnam veteran with your Desert Storm hat on, and you look worse than he does.
Yeah. And look older.
Or you might
That's the
or you
thing that
might
gets
feel
me.
10 years
But
older than he or
you got
she looks.
you guys know what I'm
It's
talking
me.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
But you look at the Gulf vet guy and you're like, God dang, he's limping and it's all pumped over and
And it,
can't
no,
carry conversations. Wonder we can function at all. So
and that's true. That Jeff, that's a great point because I never looked at it like that. But I know I've been to a lot of
mhm, mhm.
neurologist appointments, and they all, when I'm sitting in there and I get up to go and I'm walking in, I'm like, holy crap, man, you
Well,
got
now there's a lot of great research out there, and there is some great therapies out there. But again, there's no cure for Gulf War veterans'
No,
illnesses.
no.
no,
It's
I agree.
It's called us
it's
sharing information with
it's
one another.
yeah,
What works for you
it's
today?
right. What's working for you today? Well, for Kevin, it's Diet Dr. Pepper, Dad Bod Diet. But it's working. But it's
Yeah.
working for you.
It does. It does.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel
because
better.
it's right because you feel like you're doing something for yourself. For me, um, I I I finally got my 100% total and permanent, but it was from being a dumbass and jumping out of airplanes and wrecking my body, not so much as the Gulf War stuff. And I used VA Voc Rehab, VRNE, to get my bachelor's degree in 2022, and now I'm working on my master's degree. So, you know, I think the main thing is we struggle with the same thing that all veterans do when they get out, is trying to find that level of professionalism and camaraderie and ability. Even if you were a mechanic or a cook, you are high speed, low drag, and you get out and you can't find that again. You can't get to that peak level of performance. So you start to slip a little and you know what
Well,
I'm
that's
saying?
because in the civilian world, there's no real, it's very, very difficult to find
Uh-huh,
It
a
is.
uh-huh.
structured organization,
Yeah, we all
you
know.
know?
I've been active in. I don't know if you guys heard of Team Rubicon. It's a mostly veteran first responder volunteer disaster relief organization. I've been doing that for 10 years.
I've heard of them.
Um, that's a good way to get back, but get back with veterans and the camaraderie and the peer support that you know, what after World War II, it was the VFW and the American Legion. That's what those guys did. That's why they were so tight. We don't, it didn't work for us. We tried. Um, I don't know how we're going to do it, but let's get back to Kamasui a
Yeah,
little
I want to
bit.
get back to. I was just about to say, let's get back to I want to talk about the
So,
critical wind direction.
right, because here's why this is super important. When it came time to model the plumes, um, now keep in mind the people who are doing this study of the downwind hazard modeling is the CIA. And their justification was we're the only ones that know how to do it. Well, you also have to keep in mind, and I don't know, there's probably people out there that know about Dr. Rotzker, Bernard Rotzker, who's the head of the Gulf Link, Osagwe, Office of the Special Assistant. They're the ones doing the D class. They're the head. They're the lead on all this.
Mm-hmm.
He was also a senior fellow at Rand Corporation. Rand Corporation is the academic arm of Spook Central. They write all the white papers for the CIA. So you got you got one hand shaking the other here. I don't know how else to put it. So when it comes time to model either the fourth, when they blew Bunker 73, or the pit on the 10th, they said, and I was just watching it, it's on C-SPAN. They said that there was too many uncertainties regarding the pit destruction, and that they had already had technical testing blowing up bunkers back in the 70s and 80s, so that they were certain that there wasn't going to be much release come out of it. Of course, we're talking earthen covered igloo bunkers, not blowing the shit off of a Walmart. Okay.
Right.
And they said, and we had, we were lacking in meteorological data. In other words, they didn't have the weather data for March 4th because their contention was that it poured down rain soon after and washed everything away. Well, it
Yeah,
didn't
that didn't
rain.
happen.
Okay, they pulled the fuse on it about 2 o'clock on the afternoon of the 4th. It didn't start raining until about 3 o'clock in the morning the next morning. And I know because I was standing there at Camasia stuck in the frickin' gumbo mud. The other thing was they said that picture of an engineer flag was blowing to the northeast away from the troops. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. They lied. And here's why. So that they wouldn't, and from there, they totally negated. They spent 90% of their attention on March 10th and the pit destruction. That's the one that they modeled for the downwind hazard model. Why? Because in those 4 days, they retrograded 20 to 30,000 troops back to Saudi Arabia.
And did they forget that there was a flag there to tell y'all which way the wind really was blowing?
Well, we know how quick and how far one little white lie can get.
I
But
mean, you
this
can
was the
even
deal.
look.
There was a DOD list of units that came out in 97. There was another one that came out in 2000 with 168 fewer battalion-sized units on it because they took all the units that were originally determined to be in the area, they negated them by not modeling Bunker 73 and waiting 4 days till those troops left. And then there's much fewer troops to get zapped on the 10th, including all the Brits, the Canadians, the Syrians, the Saudis, all who were exposed on the 4th, but because they decided not to model the 4th, and they were gone by the 10th, they were dropped out of sight, out of mind. Not rely. You see,
Well,
see what I'm
I'm
getting at?
yeah. Well, I'm even looking at the smoke and the way it was blown up, and you can even see it curving where the wind looks like the wind
Well, yeah,
is pushing the same way the flag is. But
um,
hey, pictures
yeah.
speak 1,000
Actually, you're
words.
right. Actually, you're right. I
You're
hadn't
right.
really
Yeah,
noticed that.
yeah.
What what we what we find is that, and my degree is in human and environmental geography. I study everything from fire regimes, mega fires. This was a mega fire, and they create their own weather systems. There's all kinds of turbulence going
I
on
mean,
in
that's
there.
true. It's very true.
But um, as you can see from that picture, that thing's going pretty much straighten out, and then it's anviling
Yeah.
because that front is starting to come in from the west. And what ends up happening was that plume did not go to the northeast over marshland like they said. They did that. They lied so that they didn't have to model the 4th, because if they could take 20,000 troops off of the list and start basically the clock ticking on the 10th, then that's 20 to 30,000 troops that don't show up sick and that you have to treat for the rest of their lives. See, at the time, they didn't know for sure how this was going to go down. So the fewer people they could get off, that's why they kept finding every little reason to diminish the numbers that were potentially exposed. They dropped the amount of agent that was supposedly in the warheads. They said, "Oh, well, we found out it was less than we thought. There was less rockets. There's less this and everything, little thing they could do to whittle this down to as few as people as possible." But here's the kicker. Maybe back in '97, that satellite information wasn't available, but it is now, because now with GIS and AI,
everything.
Going back to those crooked ass documents, the thing was they weren't searchable because you couldn't OCR text recognize them, and you weren't going to sit there and type them all out. But I throw that into my AI, it reads it just fine.
And that's amazing.
So I took all of Schwarzkopf chemical logs, and that's why I threw that crooked ass one up here. I chucked them all into Claude AI yesterday, and he read the entire CENTCOM chemical logs in about 17 seconds and basically spit out and said, "You guys got fucked."
Nah, that's amazing, man. That's amazing about AI now.
Right.
I mean,
So, and I was able to, and since I now have a degree in geographic information, I was able to find Meteostat satellites 2, 3, and 4 that were up over Europe at this very time, and requested all the satellite meteorological data from February 28th to, I think, it stretched it all the way to March 17th. And they sent me a file about 15 minutes later with all of it in there. And I load it right into my ArcGIS. And guess what? I got my own downwind hazard modeling, my own crunching of all the chemical logs and all the Gulf Link documents and all the case narratives, all the testimonies, all the news articles, everything that they said. You throw it all into the AI now, and the AI comes out and goes, "Yeah, they lied."
I know. That's the one thing about it. When they ended up doing everything, eventually, I guess they didn't realize we were going to have something like AI that was going to be able to come out and
of course
read the
not.
data.
Hey, Kevin, I didn't even think of doing this until I saw Bunker on this podcast, and then I was like, "Wow, you know what? I could take all that Gulf War stuff, and we can get back at it."
So, are you saying this was done because of us? Thank you.
Well,
Hey, I just went
yeah,
a
I
little
guess
bit,
so. Yeah. But that, and it's been stuck in my craw this whole damn time.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, it's got to be. Y'all were doing it back in the 90s.
Yeah, and there was a lot of political stuff that went on, and reasons why I kind of had to step back from it. Plus, the DoD and the CIA, they had gotten their spin doctors on stuff. We couldn't get documents anymore. I was working with Bernie Sanders and Chris Shays and trying to keep the CIA and DoD honest. Long story short, I wanted to get some legislation down so that we could start doing some research. And once that was accomplished, I left Washington. I went back to Kansas, to the Kansas Veterans Commission that I was consulting for at the time, and I said, we need to do our own study. And the governor at the time said, "Why? The federal government do that?" I said, "Why? Because you're going to rely on the federal government to figure this stuff out." I said, "It's your Kansas veterans that are living off your food stamps and welfare because they're all sick and fucked up because the VA and the federal government is not taking care of them." He said, "How much do you want?" So we went and found Dr. Lee Steele out of the CDC, and she came to my office in Kansas City, and I loaded up her car full of everything I had and got her up to speed. We sat down and wrote the Kansas Gulf War Veterans Study and hired the survey people out of K-State, and hence the Kansas Veterans Gulf Veterans Study that is the definitive study to this day of
Yeah,
Gulf War
it
veterans.
still is. It still is. Very,
And
very much.
let's jump forward just a little
Yeah.
bit. Let me see if I got there's a little close up of that flag.
Yeah.
So here, so here's the problem. Even Dr. Lee Steele's excellent research, every bit of epidemiological research that has been done as far as exposures that had to do with Camisea is off by 20,000 troops. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because if you're going to study, you're going to take 500 troops that were at Camisea and 500 that weren't. How do you know 30 of them in that 500 that weren't actually were?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if your data that comes out of your research study is off by 15%, that's a lot. And so this needs to get out, and it needs to get out that they lied to us. Then they lied to us. Then they said they were going to help us. They lied to us some more. And then they said they were helping us, and they lied to us again. And it got to the point where we missed it.
Yeah.
But
I
now
agree.
I've got the weather data from March 4th. I've got the GIS that I can do the terrain analysis. And I'm working on my master's degree, and that'll be my master's thesis. And when I show up in front of the Senate Veterans Affairs this fall, and my old friend Bernie Sanders finds out that all the Gulf Link files are now missing off of the DoD website, I'm going to blow this off just like the roof of Bunker 73. And then we can get some funding because we need more research because we got to get the numbers right. And
Need more
and
research.
and we need to reassert
We need
ourselves.
more. I'm not sure I agree with we need
Well,
more research, but I mean we've had over 30 years of research. I mean
we
the bottom line is they're not going to figure out. I mean
no,
I'm all
you're
about
right.
wanting
You're right,
want
John. Let me rephrase that.
well,
We need to get back out there and say, don't forget about us. We're still sick and fucked up and pissed
eh,
off.
There you go.
I know us. We already know us. It's more like what about our kids? What
Well,
about our kids that got transitioned to all this stuff?
and there's a
That's
lot of
what that
and there's a lot of Gulf War
that's what I
veterans.
would be interested in.
Well, that yeah, and
Because
there's
I'm kind of screwed and there's no hope for me. I'm dying 10 years older than what I think I am. So
right.
the research is it going to help me? No, but it might help my kids. But you
Yeah.
got that's how they
Well,
gotta have
and
transition it into that, you know.
we've got a lot of our own Desert Storm, Desert Shield veterans that are just now going, I'm sick and messed up. How come? They didn't know any of this stuff, right? And they've been bullshitted not only by the government, but by just the rumors out there. So the technology's there. Um, but no, you're absolutely right, John. That research, we've done 30 years of it, and we haven't come up with an answer. But what we need to do is, like you said, Kevin, keep talking, keep sharing, keep supporting. And the best way to do that is to get back in the media and in front of the government. And because really, right now, this country needs a nonpartisan issue that we can get behind again and say, hey, you remember how the Gulf War veterans got gassed? Well, guess what? They got bullshitted in too.
Right.
See, there's all kinds of science behind it that they didn't tell us, you know. Um,
And that's the one thing about it, though, Jeff. That's one thing about it. There's so much science out there now that they could easily done what you did. Go put it in an AI, and it comes out and tells you exactly what the heck it just said.
there's nobody, there's nobody to make them do it.
That's right. And I do think
But
we need to hold their
but
feet to the fire.
we don't need to make them do it again. They had their shot. We have the ability right
Yeah,
now,
yeah, we do have the ability. You're absolutely correct.
and it's well within our reach. just so that we can get this back out, so that we can find our fellow veterans, and like you said, John, my son served 2 tours, um, so, and that's what I also told them when I was on the Hill. I said to the deputy director of the CIA, who walked up to me out after hearing, and said, um, "Hey, we took out a full-page apology ad in the New York Times today, for dropping a ball on this stuff." And C-SPAN and CNN are all standing there with cameras. And I looked at him. He said, "We've never done anything like that before." And I looked back at him, and I said, "Well, it's about fucking time, isn't it?" I said, "You did it to the atomic vets, you did it to the Vietnam vets, you did it to us, and by God, you're not going to do it to my kids." So they got away with it for now. But all those people are gone. They're retired. They're dead. We're still here. We got nothing better to do. And I just used my VA Voc Rehab to give me the training and the skills to kick this ball a little further down the road, at least until they see this podcast. And
Well,
and we're going to get back in the game. You're going to get that dad bot out there, Kevin, number
I'm gonna get
15,
them. I'm gonna get them.
and we're going to get some good new advocates back together. Plus, we got social media, we got YouTube and all this stuff now. We can talk about this stuff and help people out, and help answer questions and dispel myths. Uh, and and maybe, John, maybe we can somehow at least improve our lives a little bit, or at least
I,
feel like
we accomplished
we're not
really
taking it laying down.
right, and we accomplished something. I agree
Yeah,
with that, and that's why
that's
I
why you
think
guys are doing this, right?
right, exactly. I mean, we
Mhm.
want. It's not that we don't just want the United States to understand this. We want the whole world to understand it.
Well, and we had 61 other nations that had troops there, and I'm
Right.
telling you, the British suffered. Um, I think we
Yep.
talked on the phone. The Czech detection teams, those guys who I knew back in the late 90s, they're dead. They didn't make it. They died from this crap. The French were sick, but they wouldn't admit it. The DOD actually sent Rossiter went over to France. Um, yeah, but here, in the end,
It's a team game.
war is a dirty, nasty business. We should try not to do it. And honestly, guys, I think if anything made us sick, you remember how we churned up that hard pan to where it was talcum powder up to your knees? Well, down there was a 10,000-year-old microbiome that we had no immunity to. And we kicked that shit up and blew it all over. And it wasn't enough to kill us, but just enough to piss off our immune systems.
I agree with you on that. Well, Jeffrey, thank you for
Thank
sharing
you,
all
guys.
this tonight. And I mean, thank y'all for listening. I know we went a little bit longer. I think it's important that we played this tonight. And especially thank you for having the slideshow for me. And thank you for showing me how to do it because I didn't have any idea how to do that. And so, but I mean, this is important. And everybody, I want to thank
Well,
everybody who's watching. We had a big crew tonight watching this evening.
good.
And I think over time, this can get played out everywhere. And I want to. I think I'm going to push this a little bit more than some of the other videos. And so, and that's exactly what I want to do. I want to push this one out tonight a little bit more than the other ones because we actually have exactly what you just showed, and most people don't get to see this. And
Yeah.
so now
Well,
they're
and
going
and
to.
and here's the next steps. Conducted new modeling of March 4th Bunker 73 because it never got done.
Right, but once you get
Don't
that
don't
done,
don't don't worry, DOD, CIA, I got this.
yeah, and once you get that done, we're gonna replay it back on here. How
Yeah.
about that? I think
We'll
that'd be a
we'll
great
introduce
idea.
my findings here because I've
Okay,
already made some calls to get this in front of the Senate. So,
okay,
but it'll come here first.
Okay, that's what I love to hear. And I want to thank everybody for listening tonight. Thank y'all for sticking with us. Also, y'all go and check out our Patreon. That's where we do the after show shows. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can always get a hold of me at kevinsimon@goal4sideeffects.com. Y'all can reach me there. And that's exactly how you got a hold of me, right there on the email, down below on the ticker.
Yep.
He got a hold of me. He talked to me about this. I wanted it on. And as soon as I said, "Do you have time?" He goes, "Yes, I'll come on this Thursday." I said,
No,
"Okay."
no, you asked me what I was doing Thursday. I said
Thursday.
I'm on your
I'm
podcast.
on your podcast. That's right. And so I love it, and we still need more people go to YouTube, join it. The more we get the algorithms going, the more people will start understanding. And there's a lot of people starting to understand this and starting to go with
Well,
it.
and that's why we need to step up what we do, because there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of
A
old
lot.
stuff. And it reminded me, hey, I was the contributor to the Gulf War Syndrome Wikipedia page that hasn't been updated in forever. So that's going to get revamped
Yeah,
too.
I
So
think you ought to start that another page over and rename it something else, and show the beginnings and then show your findings. I really do.
yeah,
I think that's important.
but
So
well, we
now,
just need to get the truth and the facts to the people. The
100%.
and then we'll go from there.
Right. So now we're going to go into the after the show because I have other questions that I don't know if I can ask on here, but I'm going to ask them in the after show.
It's your
So
show.
everybody, y'all have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.